Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode on Fit as a Fiddle. I have a great friend and colleague of mine, Sheva Marcus. Sheva is a certified sex therapist, the author of Satisfaction Guaranteed, How to Have the Sex You've Always Wanted. Sheva has actually been on this show before on our podcast, Fit as a Fiddle, in the past once. And she's spoken about a little bit of our work, but what we're really excited for today is to dive into some very, very interesting topics, both in the clinical practice that she has and flourishes in the New York area, but also really talk about this book and how it's impacted so many people in their lives and women's sexual health, and really just trailblazed, honestly, to help people understand that they don't need to suffer in silence, and they don't need, there's so many myths out there, and we're here to bust some of those myths and get the real doctor who knows this stuff in and out and has worked with so many patients to really talk to us about it. So welcome onto the show today, Dr. Marcus. Please join us.
Thank you so much for having me back. Now, I love you. I love the show, and I love the conversations to be able to make women's lives better. So
Amazing.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yes. And one other thing that I wanted to add is that I am enthralled by your social media. I think it's so fun and so accessible and such a great learning tool for so many people. It's incredible. We'll drop the handle here in the show notes, but for people who want to just, as you're listening to the show, just take a look and start scrolling. The Instagram and the Facebook social media handles are at Dr. So Dr. Batsheva. So it's DrBatsheva. So please go ahead and give Dr. Batsheva Marcus a follow there. But we're so happy to have you today. And firstly, before we even dive into any of our content, I'd love for the listeners to understand what kind of brought you into the space and what brought you into women's sexual health in the first place.
So I may be a slightly unusual case because I grew up in a traditional Orthodox Jewish household. So I was a very conservative household. Nobody talked about sex. And as I got older, felt very, very lost in my sex life and also very resentful of the fact, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this, that we just didn't get the sex education that we needed. So I took a circuitous route into this. I started out doing totally different work in social work, and then ultimately gravitated towards female sexual issues because I started becoming aware of how much the play between the physiological and the psychological are impacted. So, so often when women have low desires now, or they're having problems with orgasm or even pain, I mean, this must make you really crazy. And people are like, oh, it's in your head, you should see a therapist. And there are definitely pieces that we control in our brain, or that our brain are part of, or that our relationship might be a part of. But it became so clear to me that the physiological, the medical, the medications we're on, the birth control pills we're on, those also have a huge impact on our lives. And so I got into this field. It was a burgeoning field 25 years ago, where this idea that, we can deal with women and understand all the physiological components of it and all the psychological components. And when you work with women on both of those levels, the results are incredible. And so you probably see it day to day in your work with pain, right? If you tell a woman the pain's in her head, she's not going to get anywhere. And if you work with a woman and you deal with the pain, but you don't also take the time to listen to what she's going through and how that has affected her life and how to help her shift into using new tools, it's not going to work either. So I got really passionate about this and ran a center for 25 years that did exactly this combination of the medical and the psychological. And what was frustrating to me is I would get calls from all over the world and all over the country. And so I said, you know what? It's time for a book that deep dives for women into concrete, real solutions to their sexual issues. Because I really believe in all my heart that every woman deserves and can have a good sex life. And I know it's hard. I go on and on and on, but when I meet with a woman and she says to me, I feel like it's over, I'm never going to have good sex, it breaks my heart because I know that's not true. So I wrote this book. It was published a year and a half ago under the name Sex Points in hardcover, which was well received, but it became very clear to both the publisher, Hachette, and I, that women were saying this was just foundationally changing their life. And this was about more than just sex. It was about satisfaction in their sex life. And so when it came to publish it in paperback, we put it out under the name Satisfaction Guaranteed, which I love. Actually, I love this new name much better, How to Have the Sex You've Always Wanted. And so that's kind of how I got into this field. And as you can probably tell by the fact that I'm going on and on and on and on, I'm really, really passionate about this and really an advocate of women and being able to own, being able to heal, and being able to have a really good sex life in whatever context that means for you. And that may be sex by yourself, just, saying like it's, solo sex is sex too. So on that note, that's my introduction, and very long-winded, and I apologize, but I'm so excited to be talking to you about this.
Not at all. That is incredible. I'm so happy and thrilled for the audience to hear that. I know that you and I have collaborated a couple of times, and that story always resonates with me because I'm from a traditional Indian household. So we didn't really talk about anything like poo, pee, like everything was very like hush, hush, like no sex talk, no, like you don't say the word vagina, like you don't say the word penis. So it obviously coming from that background and then seeing so many people in the Western world who are like, oh, I have this problem, blah, blah. And I'm like, you guys said the word sex at home, and I'm like, wow, like even people who are exposed to a Western culture where their families often like joked or spoke about things still feel this deep-rooted shame. And I know that's something you can totally touch on, right?
Yeah. And I'm so happy you said that, Snea, because I say this all the time. I feel like women who grew up in religious homes feel like they're never going to be able to overcome the shame that they had, which is not true. And over this course of this, we'll talk about that more. But what's really striking to me is that how much shame exists in people who grew up in completely secular environments, and even in environments where the families did talk about sex. And in a certain way, for them, it's harder because they sort of feel crazy, right? Like the women who grew up in these restrictive religious homes feel like, oh, well, the reason I feel all this shame is because it wasn't talked about in my home, and it wasn't okay. But the women who grew up in these more secular homes feel like, okay, really, what's the matter with me? Because I don't have no reason. Like I say, the religious women almost have something to hang it on, so it makes them feel less crazy. But I feel like sexual shame and confusion is so, it's just in the ethos. Do you know what I mean? It's just so, it permeates the world that we live in that it's almost impossible to get through it without experiencing that level of shame. And I'm here to say that you can get past it, or you can use it. Sometimes using it is actually even more effective, and that there really are techniques to like reclaim your sex life.
Yeah. And what I really liked also that you said in the beginning is people get so focused on either just the physiological aspects of this very complex, concept, or just the psychological concept. And what I love about your work, your practice, and like everything that you've done in your career is really hone in on the fact that it is extremely important for people to understand that is an interconnected two-way street between your brain and your body, how and like what you just said, like our environment, the way we were raised, our expectations around our sexual selves, along with the physiological things, the blood work, the medications in our body, what we're eating, what we're drinking, and our level of movement and exercise and stress and hormones, and all of these things play such an important factor. But that if we don't address that together, then you actually are missing such a huge piece in the puzzle in overcoming a lot of this. And I love that in the book. I've read the book cover to cover, and I am just enthralled by how much information there is, firstly. So, there's so much that people can gain from that book and really understand what's going on with their health. But then you can also pick and choose. You have these like categories where you can be like, this is the section that like really feels like it's more me. So I'm going to really read that part 5 times and check in. So I'd love for you, before we even move on to anything else, actually talk about the structure of the book, because I love the structure.
Sure. I tried to build it like choose your own adventure. I'm so glad you touched on that. Yeah. So like choose your own adventure. Right. Well, the underlying theory of the book, which is the underlying theory of how I work with clients privately, is that, people always think that they want me to figure out what's broken and fix it, right? Like, what light switch is off, Batsheva, let's flick it back on. And, oh, that were the case, usually it's a lot of different factors that are, getting involved in you're having a problem. And there are a lot of different fixes that you could use that will give you help. And so the model that I think is really helpful for my clients is that I say, this is not on and off. This is like, you need 100-point threshold to have good sex, right? Like, you need to hit that 100-point threshold. And that point, those points could come from, your innate health, the amount of light that you're getting, the amount of hormones you have running through your body, although those could be connected. They could come from, a new relationship, an intimate relationship. They could come from, your fantasy life in your brain. They could come from your education, all those points. And points can get taken away by kids banging at the door, by, things that are rocky in the relationship, by the birth control that you went on, by the, anti-anxiety medication that you're on. So what you need to do is look at all those factors. And that sounds complicated, but it's actually not. It's actually extremely empowering. So, sometimes I'll give an example. Like, let's say, we've got like this 19-year-old Tammy, I'm going to call her Tammy, just whatever, who has, she's in great health. She's got hormones coursing through her system. She's, got a job that she likes. She's not, she's a little stressed, not terribly stressed. She lives in New York, so everybody's stressed, but okay. But she's walking around with like 90 points just on her own, right? And then she goes to a bar and she meets some hot new guy and they could hook up in the bathroom, right? Because she only needs 10 more points and she's going to have good sex, right? So she meets this hot new guy, that's given her 10 or 20 points. She has great sex in the worst place, but it doesn't matter because the sex feels really good to her and it's working really well, right? So now, but let's take Tammy, and it's like 5 years later and she meets some amazing guy. I always use Keanu Reeves, but you can say a lot about me with that, but okay, we could use anybody. She meets Keanu Reeves and they fall madly in love. And so Keanu Reeves, the relationship is hot and new, and that's giving her 20 points. And Keanu Reeves, she loves him, so that's giving her 20 points. So Tammy and Kiana are great. She's working at 130 points. And it doesn't matter if they have a little fight in the morning or if he leaves all the crumbs near the toaster. It doesn't matter if she gets extra stressed at work. And those points, she's losing 10 points here, 10 points here. She's working with such a surf feed of points, 130 points. At 100, she's going to hit 100 when they have sex, and it's going to be fine. And everything's good until they get married. It's 5 years later. Now she still loves them, still got those 20 points, but it's not so hot, new, and erotic anymore. So she's only walking around with, let's say, 110 points. And now either the kids are knocking at the door, taking away points, or her hormone profile drops, or she's super duper stressed at work and, or she stops fantasizing. Like, for all of those things, now she's walking around with a total of 90 points with everything when they have sex. And their sex life is not working. And she has no idea what the problem is. So typically, Tammy will go to her gynecologist who'll say, oh, well, how was it on vacation? And she may think, well, actually it was okay on vacation. And then the gynecologist might say to her, well, okay, Tammy, then it's clearly psychological. But it's not. And Tammy leaves feeling worse because she doesn't live on vacation. She's living with this guy. She wants to have sex with this guy and so I say to Tammy, nope, Tammy, there's a lot of places we can get points from. Let's look at your birth control and see if shifts can be made. Let's look at your erotic brain and your fantasies. Have you used them? Have you let them lie dormant? Are they gone? Let's look at what you can do in terms of your childcare to make that like a little more accessible. Let's look at all the other medications you're on. And what's amazing to me is watching women reclaim their ability to have good sex. You don't have to be 22 with Keanu Reeves. You just don't, you could be, I had a client yesterday who, she's 56 and she came to me and she said to me yesterday, 3 months ago when I started seeing you, I thought my sex life was over for good. Like, I felt like I was closed for business. I wasn't interested. My vagina was a disaster and a mess. And with a combination of some hormones, some dilating, some fantasy work, some conversations with her husband, all those things. And she's like, they're raring to go. And there's no reason to shut yourself. If you want a sex life, you can have it. So that's what I need to say. And I know I get super passionate. I talk really fast, but if you want a sex life, you can have it.
Yeah, no, I'm totally on board. And that example was incredible because I'm sure listeners can resonate with something like that. And again, it's not that one thing that I love that you stress a lot in both your social media, in the book. You've said this in the last podcast, and I want to hear it more now. I want people to hear it more, is your age does not dictate your sex life. It is really the situational things in your environment, in your body that do. And that doesn't mean like just because you're older and sure there are hormonal changes that you're doomed to have a terrible sex life. There's so many more factors and there's so many more ways that you can impact it, which is why I like that point system idea, because it kind of puts all of that in your control a little bit more, because age you can't control. Like age is just time just goes by. You cannot do anything about it, from like even when I was 19, 22 years old, whatever, to later on in my life, like one day when I'm 60, that is going to be inevitable. But what's not inevitable, what's controllable, and what you can influence are all of these other factors. So one of the things that you mentioned already one or two times and I want to dive into are fantasies. So I'll let you take it away.
Yes, I love talking about fantasies, and I feel like it's an area where I feel like women kind of get lost. They lose it in the shuffle, and there's some very, I think, concrete techniques and ideas for you to keep in mind. And this can have a huge impact, especially if you're somebody, and I hear this all the time, I'm in a long-term relationship, not really so interested in sex anymore. Like, it's complicated. Long-term monogamous relationships are work. We don't always, acknowledge that. And they can absolutely stay hot and sexual. So one way to do that is through your fantasies. And what I think, Sneha, people don't realize is that you actually have to work on your fantasies. People get lost there because when you're 18 or 20 and you have massive amounts of hormones coursing through your body and you have probably a little more free time, fantasies come very naturally. Like you don't have to work on them at all. But what happens over the years as we get busier, as our hormones drop, very often that part of our brain starts to shut down. So, I talk a lot about neuroplasticity and the fact that parts of the brain that you don't use tend to quiet down. Basically, the neurotransmitters stop functioning. It doesn't mean that they die, they're still there, but the blood isn't flowing into that area. The synapses aren't shooting off in the same way. The neurotransmitters are quieting down. Our brain does that to save time, right? Like if you speak Italian and you speak Italian all the time, your Italian is going to be good. And if you stop using that Italian for 10 years, when you try to use that Italian, it's going to be really rusty because the part of your brain that uses these other languages has basically quieted down to give more energy to the other parts of your brain. It's going to be like, oh, effort to start talking Italian again. But once you get going, it's going to come back because all of those synapses are going to start firing again and the neurotransmitters are going to be working. And not only is your Italian going back, it's going to be easier to learn Spanish. So we need to realize that about our erotic brains as well. So if you haven't fantasized or used your erotic brain, it may be some work to get it going, but it's worth it because you need your brain. Your brain is 50% of your sex drive, and you need your brain to be working with you, especially when you're in a long-term relationship, because you need it to keep things alive and well and exciting. Your mind does not like, your sex life does not like repetition. It just doesn't. So you need to be able to go wild and free. So should we dig into some like specific things?
Because I was just going to say, there's like some very specific Instagram, like reels and videos that you've done that I love, that you help give people permission to actively take a part in their fantasy lives. And so you have a bunch of strategies of how that can happen. And I'd love for you to share at least like one or two, at least with the guests.
Yes. I used to have a thing called Fantasy Friday. Maybe I should bring it back. I haven't done that in a while, but anyhow, I should maybe do that. So the first thing I would say is I'm going to say a few things. I'm going to say one, sort of how to get yourself started. And then 2 and 3 would be the major pitfalls I find women fall into. So how to get yourself started is very often by using an external stimulus. So even though it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people, watching erotica, is a way to do it. Listening to erotica is a way to do it. and reading erotica. So that's the trifecta. There are 3 ways to sort of start getting yourself reacclimated to eroticism and erotic stories. And for people, it's kind of like everybody's a little bit different. Some women really enjoy watching, some women that doesn't work for them. There are now fabulous apps out there that have audio like stories. Dipsy is one of them. If people want to look for one, Dipsy is a really excellent one. Meet Rosie, I think, also has stories on it. And not just stories. Some women get really turned on just by listening to sounds of sex, and you can just Google sounds of sex. All of this sounds like, oh, are you serious, Batsheva? And yes, I am dead serious.
She's very serious, guys. This is like this is medical like news. This is not like, hey guys, go watch porn right now and like have a good time with yourself. This is like tools and strategies to overcome the terrible situation that, you know, a society is in with women's sexual health. So please open your minds.
And reading. And a lot of women I find reading, like when 50 Shades of Grey came out 10 years ago or whenever it was like revolution. Like women really, really like loved reading it. The movie was not so hot, I have to just say. But now let me tell you why I want you to start with this. And I want you to start with this, not like right before you're having sex, but I will say to my clients every morning, for 2 or 3 minutes, I want you to look or watch or see or read or do something that gets you a little bit turned on, right? And the reason I want you to start doing this is because you need to sort of think of yourself as an explorer to kind of figure out now, today, what turns me on. And that may be very different from 10 years ago when you were 15 years old, and it may be very different from 2 years ago when you were 30 years old, and it may be very different from what it will be 20 years from now when you are older. So you want to identify things that turn you on, and then you want to be able to move them into your brain and magnify them. So for example, I'll just give you an example. Let's say you're reading a story and you're like, oh, the guy is watching the woman through a keyhole and is watching her undress and is finding and then getting really turned on. And you're like, that is turning me on. So now you're an explorer. Is it the watching that's turning you on? Is it the being watched? Which for a lot of women, that's really the being desired and wanted, but everybody's different. Is it the being watched? And what would make that even hotter in your head? If there were 3 people watching you, if you knew they were watching, if you didn't know they were watching, if you were on a Broadway stage, do you know what I mean? Like, what would take that and expand that in your head? Because your head is going to make you the most erotic fantasies. Because what Snea likes and what Batsheva likes are totally different. What Snea likes, I might find boring, or what Batsheva likes, Snea might find, icky. Like what Snea is going to create the best eroticism in Snea's head, and Batsheva is going to create the best eroticism in Batsheva. And if you're listening to this, you have to trust me that you can do this. Okay. And then, and so I say to people, just start that way. Just start that way. And now here's where it gets tricky. Here are the 2 huge roadblockers that get in the way all the time. So I'm going to put them out there. Okay. Ready? Okay.
Yes.
1, don't freaking judge yourself. Okay. Because that is, I hear women say, oh my God, I'm thinking about women, but I'm not a lesbian. Okay. You like thinking about women. It turns you on, but you're not a lesbian. It's a fantasy. That is understanding the difference. Or somebody will say, oh my God, I keep thinking about group sex and I'm so opposed to that philosophically or I'm like, that's great. You're not actually doing it. You are just fantasizing about it. Like, where in our society did we lose the ability to separate fantasy from reality? I cannot tell you how many women just don't allow themselves to fantasize because they feel like it's gross or it's not, appropriate, or, what does that mean that like, I want to like have a thing with the doctor. I don't really want, no, it's just a fantasy. Just enjoy it for what it is. It's one of the few things we have that are free, not bad for you. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it doesn't mean you're going to go up and do stuff. It just means that this turns on your erotic mind. So for so many women judging themselves, and I have to talk about this piece of it because I feel like this comes up all the time, which is the non-PC-ness of women's fantasies when they're being like overtaken, right? Like women So many women love the fantasy of being like somebody climbing in the window and taking them, right? And then they feel so much guilt about that. They're like, well, I wouldn't want that to happen in real life. And I'm like, of course you wouldn't
It's
want it
not
to
real
happen.
life.
It's not real life. And not only is it not real life, let's get a quick check in here. Who is creating the person who's climbing in your window or the number of people who are climbing in your window? Who's telling them exactly what to say? Who's making them look exactly the way you want them to look at? Who's having them react the way they're reacting? And who's telling them when to stop? You are in 100% control. That's what a fantasy is, right? But for women, this like being ravaged fantasy, I guess our society is just, it's so scary to us that we don't allow ourselves to let go into our fantasies. And that is just really, really problematic. So that's issue one. And issue two is women feel really guilty fantasizing about people other than their permanent partners.
And what do you tell them about that? Again, the whole control aspect.
So I'd say this, two things. It is a fantasy. Again, do you like, I joke around about Keanu Reeves. If I met Keanu Reeves and dated Keanu Reeves, I probably wouldn't even really like him. Do you know what I mean? Like he's probably narcissistic. I don't know if that's true. He's like, he's too busy I'm not interested in that world. Like I want to sleep with the fantasy of Keanu Reeves. The person you are fantasizing about is a fantasy. Even if it's the guy in the cubicle next door, you really think you want to be picking up his socks? Do you know what I mean? Like it's the fantasy. Look, if somebody's saying to me, like, I really am completely not attracted to my partner and I'm constantly fantasizing about this one person in the cubicle next to me, I say, okay, like we need to dive a little deeper into that. So I'm not negating that. But for most women, it's just the sense like, I'm having sex with my husband and I'm fantasizing about a baseball player. And I'm like, yes, because it's just a baseball player. And you're using that energy to bring it home to your spouse. You want to be having sex with this person who you love and you want to have good sex with. And some of that is allowing your brain to run free and wild. And what scares a lot of women, I think, is that, and this is what women will say as well, but if I'm thinking about somebody else, maybe he's also fantasizing about some movie star. And I'm like, yes, maybe he is. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and that's fine because he's choosing to have sex with you. Again, it's just a fantasy, like we choose often, especially for when these long-term relationships, we want to be in this relationship with this person and we want to have good sex with them. And anything that makes the sex better with them, that's a good thing. And that's a wonderful thing. And your erotic brain likes to roam free and wild. And the more you fantasize, the better it's going to be for your relationship. And so I feel like women need to kind of understand that and also get that fantasies are something you have to work at. I know they popped in automatically when you were 18. They probably don't do that anymore, but you can make that happen again. You can wake up the erotic part of your brain again.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, was that too long-winded, Sneha?
No, that's perfect. I love that because one thing that I always tell my patients when they're like something related to pelvic floor health that they're coming to me for, I always remind them that the skeletal muscle of your pelvic floor is extremely in your control. Like you can contract these muscles, you can relax these muscles, you can coordinate these muscles and everything in between, unless you have like a spinal cord injury or like a neuromuscular condition. Like that's very not really the type of people who come to me. And so they'll say things like, oh, I'm not able to do this, or I'm not able to do that. And I just help them understand that this is under your control in your voluntary mind. You have access to this. And so I think from a fantasy perspective and from everything, all the work that you do with libido and hormones and all this stuff, it brings that control back into saying, you don't have to be doomed. Again, that whole concept of like age being an uncontrollable factor, or certain aspects of your life being uncontrollable, but there's so many other things that are controllable. And you might not even think that they are. Like, for example, just figuring out a night of childcare. I know that's so hard in this country, especially, and so hard for people to do, but it's not impossible. It's just a way of thinking about it and allocating your time to saying, let's figure this out. And if it's important enough, and if you can figure it out, it's like, it's possible, right? So I love that we started this whole conversation with fantasies because firstly, who doesn't want to talk about that? But well, a lot of people don't, but here we are talking about it because that's what this podcast is all for. But it helps people understand that just that 2 to 3 minutes in the morning, or, the timers that you set for yourself to just like relax your body and have a fantasy in like the middle of a work day that just kind of changes things up, or like makes you get out of that routine, that mundane life that you feel like you are living, and introduces an element of surprise, even if it's to yourself. It can do a lot to shift that psychological mindset, change the way that our brain kind of normally processes the world and everything around us, and introduce just pleasure and happiness and satisfaction, right?
Yes, it's the dessert of life, right?
Yes, I love that. Okay, so let's talk about, I kind of want to touch into like the low desire hormones piece, because I feel like those two kind of can go together a little bit. And so when it comes to hormones, well, I'll just let you start with hormones first, and then maybe we can tie in low desire.
Right. So I want to talk about, testosterone, because we have so many misconceptions about testosterone. We think of it as a male hormone, and it is not. Women really, really need it. And it basically, you have less and less of it as you get older. It's just part of life. The same way that you have estrogen drops as you get older, and women really do need estrogen too. And I'm a huge proponent of estrogen. But I will say that, you know what? It kills me because, let me use this example. If you see two, and I may have said this the last time I was on, so I apologize if I do, but it's so, to me, this crystallizes things so well. If you see two 17-year-olds and they are like, on a date, and they can't keep their hands off each other, and like, they're just like all over each other, is your first thought, oh, they must have had a really meaningful conversation, or he must have just bought her a lovely present? No, your first thought, and correctly, is their hormones are raging, which they are. And then yet somehow, as we hit like, our second child, often this is the second child thing, mid 30s, early 40s, and we're less and less interested in sex, and it's harder for us to get in the mood, and it's like harder to have orgasms. We never go that route. We never say, oh, maybe it's hormonal. We always like, oh, it must be my relationship with my husband. And that makes me crazy, because, you go see a therapist and they could spend, a year digging into your relationship, and your relationship is actually fine, but, your hormones are a mess. So I really feel like women can't ignore that, really can't ignore that. And, we've just, I would say in the last 15 or 20 years, really started understanding how critical the testosterone is to women, how important the estrogen is for your vaginal functioning, for your brain, your bones, your hair, like everything, how well the testosterone seems to work better when you're properly estrogenized. And it's really not so complicated to add a little bit of testosterone into your day. Now, there are ways to get it. Sunlight is critically important in terms of getting testosterone, but, sometimes you just need a little more help than that. And what I find is that women who feel like their desire is really low can be really, really helped by having their hormones checked. And I'll say one more thing, and then I will. Unfortunately, it's a new area. And so sort of classic doctors will say, oh, I tested your hormones, they're fine. Well, they're fine for somebody who's not dead. Do you know what I mean? Like, this woman just sent me her hormone profile, and I'm laughing because the normal was 2 to 40 or something. And 2 is like nothing. There's nothing left, And, the people in the field are much more confident about keeping people at a little bit higher levels, which are probably normal for younger people. And seem to be, more and more data coming out that it's perfectly safe and really possibly protective. So don't be scared of your hormones, and understand you're not crazy. Like, I feel like you're not crazy if you feel like your desire is dropping, your relationship's okay. It's not like, none of us have perfect relationships. None of us. I've been married 40 years and I'm in a great marriage, but believe me, there are times it was terrible, or times it's not good. But our sex life is almost a separate, independent thing. Like our there could be problems in the relationship if we weren't having sex, right? Not necessarily you're not having sex because there are problems in the relationship. So don't go down that rabbit hole, and sort of have deep respect for your hormone profile.
Yeah. Well, a follow-up question just on the hormone profile then is, with your work, what do people ask their doctors, or if they were coming to see you, for example, like what do they say, and what are the kind of interventions, and how do they get checked for this? Someone's like, oh, I should go and figure this out.
So at one point I was working at a center where we did both. Right now I'm working independently as a therapist, but I have doctors that I work with, right? So I will send like doctors that I know, like, can understand this. I hate to say this, but the younger gynecologists are often the ones who are more up to date on this and understand this better. There are sexual health specialists. So you can absolutely, do a Google search and look for a gynecologist with a sexual health specialization, because if they have a sexual health specialization, they will understand hormones. And the hormones can be given to you on, like, there's creams, there are patches, there are pellets that they can insert, like little tiny pellets that insert of testosterone now. And you want to, if you see a gynecologist and she says, "Oh, hormones are nonsense," you say, "Thank you very much," and you pack yourself up and you find yourself another gynecologist, because it is not nonsense. My book really does outline. I tried really hard to give almost prescriptions in the book. Like, this is the kind of hormones, this is how you want to look at them, this is what you should talk to your medical provider about. And one of the things I really tried to do in this book is, like, give you, the reader, enough information so that you can go in there as an educated person and talk to your doctor feeling confident that you have a sense of what's going on and understand what she or he may be telling you. And so you can get the help that you need. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the bottom line is also, what we're talking about right now is barely scratching the surface on the content that's in this book. Like, having read it, I learned so much, even being in the pelvic world field. There was the testosterone piece, for example, was a big eye-opening thing for me. I went and started looking at the references and reading articles about it, because I was like, why didn't we learn about any of this in school? Like, even in like pelvic health classes and courses, I feel like we didn't get enough information and education to talk to our patients and provide the correct referrals. So I just encourage anyone, I mean, we're scratching the surface, but read the book, because it gives you so much information. And again, there's a lot, but there's also ways that you can go into, like, this piece makes the most sense to me, and I'm going to read this 10 times, because you need to. Sometimes it's like really good information. You want to go back and go back and go back. So I just want to say the name of the book again for everyone: Satisfaction Guaranteed: How to Have the Sex You've Always Wanted. And if anything sparked your interest today, I really want you guys to go dive in, grab that book. It's in hardcover and paperback, right?
And it's
both ways.
Paperback is Satisfaction Guaranteed: How to Have the Sex You've Always Wanted. If you're a hardcover girl and you want to get sex points, it's the same book. And Sneha, I just need to say how much it means to me that you said that about the book that you found, like, because you're so knowledgeable, and the fact that you found it so helpful. Like, I just wish I could reach over in this Zoom and give you a big hug, because I just makes me feel so good.
No, truly. I mean, even people who are listening to this, our audience is very widespread. So if you're a healthcare practitioner, a pelvic health expert, or somebody in like the women's health space or the female health space at all, like, just read it. It's almost like a textbook of information that I think people should just have and know as a reference for a lot of things. So grab your book. I'm also going to link people the show from the previous episode that you were on. We touched on some, like, barely any overlap. So there's a lot of information on that other episode, I think, that people can gain from, especially if you listen to this and you're like, I want to hear more. Then go ahead and listen to the other show as well. We'll drop that in. Share this with your friends, tag your girlfriends, tag your mom.
And I am going to give a plug for social media, because
Yes.
On Instagram and Facebook, I'm at Dr. Batsheva, that you said Dr. Batsheva. At TikTok, because they threw me off, I am now under the Dr. Batsheva, same thing, okay. THEDR Batsheva. I put so much content on TikTok, and I see it complete. My kids make so much fun of me that I'm on social media, but I feel like it's such a great educational platform, and it's been such a gift to be able to do that. So, use it, just use it.
Absolutely. Share it to people, send it to people, text it to people, tag people. I think it's an incredible tool that we have that. And especially like educated, knowledgeable healthcare practitioners who can take concepts that are so like shameful or taboo, but put it on a platform where, people from a lot of different generations can have access so easily, I think is very powerful. So I'm always like, instead of like a copycatted dance going viral, let's do like a vibrator dance / education go viral. So
I did my PhD thesis on vibrators. Did you know that? Yes, I know. I just needed to throw that in there. So I do a lot on vibrators. Yes.
Amazing. Well, Bathsheba, thank you so much for being here today. I feel like we could just talk for hours and hours and hours. But thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for coming onto the show now twice. And thank you for the book. And I just want to keep collaborating with you forever. So let's always be in each other's lives.
Thank you so much for this and for everything that you do. I'm blowing you a kiss.
Mwah.